recently I was poking around my garbage, well, not garbage, just some boxes under the table, and I found this iPhone. Well, until like April 2022, it was my daily driver. Then I was like urged to buy a newer one because I needed to get newer software in it, but this wasn't capable of running anything. And it's really bad in upgradability. So I opened it up, it had iOS 6 in it. And I was like, wow, why can't they make any videos regarding the history of the iOS? Well, let's dive in. Greetings internet, my name is Peter, recording iPhone Reimagine Incorporated. How we are doing right now? I'm doing well. Because I have iOS 6 here. So I looked at this awesome design and was like, why shouldn't I make a video about the history? So now, let's dive in.
First up, before we actually starting the discussion, how to write apps for iPhone. Well, we will discuss the solution a little bit later, but to understand more, now we're like in 2022, and we need to get back to 2007 to understand more. More importantly, we need to dive into WWDC 07. More importantly, I'm talking about Keynote right now. So now, let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Jobs. Well, I've got some big news this year, and I want the whole world to hear it. I quit.
When actually Steve Jobs introduced the first generation iPhone and the first generation software for iPhone called iPadOS. The entire audience was killed, according to memories people had at that conference. Steve Jobs announced one last thing. Actually, there were two sentences, but hey, who cares? So he said that iPhone will launch on June 29th. So the conference was in the beginning of June. And the second thing, that there is no SDK required. For perspective, SDK is a software development kit. So how would you develop apps for iPhone without even having a software development kit? So software development kit, for basics, it's just a set of commands which helps to make it all possible. Steve Jobs actually wanted this to happen, but he needed a solution to control apps and to make everything private. So for Apple, one of the most important things of all the times was privacy. Apps could have been an easy way, and they are, to find out your personal data, and it would have been really bad if someone just took via an application, distributed via just simple internet web page, and just shared your privacy, like your cards, your phones, your password, just everywhere on the internet. So now can anyone log into your Instagram account, for example, or pay some outrageous prices to some scam products. So at that time, Steve Jobs' vision was web apps. So this was actually a temporary good solution, but it has also some bad areas. Firstly, it was slow. Web apps, they were run via Safari, the default iOS browser. You know, if something even would have happened inside web app, it wouldn't have exploded inside the system, so it wouldn't damage anything. It wouldn't take your card number or anything else. That didn't work because it was uncomfortable. So now we come to App Store. So Steve Jobs actually needed to make iPhone private device. So it was a device which actually held a lot of freaking info. Your card information, your contacts, your passwords, everything is there. Even your cache is there. Steve Jobs needed to make a great solution to control everybody from making apps which actually control your data and share them everywhere. How to distribute apps and check if they're okay or not? Well, the App Store. Well, the main idea behind the App Store was like, you just go inside the App Store, and you know there's kind of a filter inside App Stores. All secure apps are distributed on the App Store, and before the publishing, all the apps which actual developers send to App Store, they're checked. And all apps which require a lot of data, yeah, some apps really require your camera, your microphone, for example, to record voice messages and something else. But if they require really a lot of data and they work like spyware or malware, then the app is sent back to developer and Apple's like, hey, we'll write this app or we will remove your developer account. Well, removing your developer account, it means just wasting money just in nowhere. So developer accounts cost $99 per year. Apple made App Store and they implemented it in the Phone OS 2.0. Well, I don't know why Apple actually called it Phone OS, we'll get to that back in a bit. But now we need to rewind back to 2007. So iPhone OS 1, there weren't really a lot of features. So it had only 12 basic applications and there wasn't any customization at all. Yeah, you could set a wallpaper for a lock screen, but you couldn't customize a home screen. You couldn't even drag applications around the home screen. So you couldn't even make folders. But that changed with iPhone OS 2.0. In iPhone OS 2.0, Apple actually improved customability inside home screen because Apple introduced App Store and you needed to store somehow those apps. So actually Apple will improve the home screen customization even more and they do it even now. For example, App Library, which concept makers of macOS 13 wanted to implement in macOS, and that sucked. So now, back to Phone OS 2. So in iPhone OS 2.0, Apple made something more, but there weren't really a lot of fixes. And then actually people started exploring one really dangerous bug. Here we need to dive into the video format which iPhone records and saves to your photo library.
Have you made a video on your iPhone? Yes, dumb question. Well, it's saved in .mov format. So, library originally stored only .mov files. What is .mov? Quick lesson. .mov is a unified video file system for iPhones, iPads, and Macs. .mov stands for QuickTime Movie. QuickTime is a default media player in macOS. So now, let's get back to Photo Library. So now Photo Library is able to save whatever video you download. But back in 2009, more specifically Phone OS 2, the library could store only .mov files. And MPEG-4 specifically caused a lot of troubles because after trying to open it up and start playing, your phone crashed. Yeah, it started fresh but with no files in it. This is how one click can make your day or entire week suck a duck.
Now we go to Phone OS 3. So Phone OS 3 actually was really cool release because it fixed that issue with MP4 files which couldn't be played on iPhone. iPhone OS 3 brought a lot of new features regarding copy, cut and paste. Yeah, it's arrived for the first time in iOS, so iPhone user didn't have this feature before. And the very first version of voice assistant. It was called not Siri, it was called voice control. At that time Siri was a separate application in App Store. Well, voice control was only available in new iPhones, which latest iPhones compatible with the system.
But that was just the beginning of the release notes of Phone OS 3. Well, there were a lot of features, but Apple started integrating iPhone into the ecosystem. So now it's way easier to interact with iPhone via USB port. That's when all reviewers started using the word ecosystem. So earlier we could sync iPhone with Mac. Third-party apps actually were granted access to USB, and now such apps like, for example, JetDrive Go allow you to transfer all data from your USB with a special dongle to your iPhone. Or for example, my personal one. So, for example, you're capturing a video, how you're, for example, doing something. You're not capturing, you're transferring directly to your Mac. And later, it shows up on the streaming web page. Well, this is how I used to stream back in the day. If you want to follow my musical account, feel free to write sucks.peterregordon on Instagram.
We are now in 2011. There is macOS 10 Line and iOS 4 on the horizon. Well, and they fixed a lot of bugs and they started actually fixing the App Store. So App Store was a cool application, but it has also some bugs again. So we had also one really awful button, update all apps in update section. so they removed it. They now allowed to redeem gift cards in App Store. So if you get a gift card, and now you can just enter this code to App Store, redeem it, and buy apps just for having a gift card. Now iOS 5. iOS 5 actually gave a lot of inspiration to macOS 10 Lion. So macOS 10 Lion was only in the development stage and Apple didn't even introduce it. So macOS 10 Lion was introduced in line with iOS 5. And in that year, Apple introduced the first generation iPad. So when first generation iPad was introduced, Apple recalled the software. Now it calls not iPhone OS but iOS. So that is why now we have iOS. But later in 2019, Apple actually will divide the iOS for iPhone and iPadOS for iPads. But it's now 2011, right?
In means of interaction between Apple's devices, Apple always loved to create new devices inspired by early ones. So here's a quick lesson. For example, iMac and iPod gave inspiration to iPhone. Later, these two already existing devices give inspiration to iPad, which actually later gave inspiration to many other devices. So let's take a look on other things which Apple needed to solve before creating so-called ecosystem. At that time, Apple had macOS and Leopard. It was great. Originally, it was advertised with 0 new features, but hey, you get the idea. But people liked it, but it wasn't great enough to create an ecosystem. So Apple released OS X Lion, and at that time, Apple created an ecosystem. And the greatest example can be the AirDrop. So AirDrop, quick lesson if you don't use iPhone. So for example, you want to send to your iPhone a file. So you just send it, click send to iPhone, and voila, this file is already on your iPhone. And you save it and download it. This is one of really cool features regarding interaction between devices in your ecosystem. Or another one, iCloud. We'll discuss that right now.
And you might probably ask me, didn't Apple have iCloud earlier? No, they didn't. But they had back in the day some analogs. For example, MobileMe or .Mac. So this was something iCloud, but they were paid. Yeah, iCloud is also paid, but you can actually use it without even paying. But those services, you need to just buy some kind of box, and you should actually install it on your Mac via SuperDrive. So you just needed to throw in the DVD and you'll install it. And .Mac is really freaking known. It dates back to the first macOS 10 version 10.0, Cheetah. So it's also like iCloud, but it's got around 20% of feature which current iCloud has. So iCloud is free, so you can pay to extend the availability, more importantly storage, but iCloud is going on. What happened to the Mac? Mac actually inspired a lot of from home screen, so that's when Apple introduced the Launchpad. So Launchpad was actually a really comfortable piece of crap. So I talk about that more in my macOS 13 concepts episode. So if you want to check that out, feel free to do this by the link in the description. So now we go to famous iOS 6. This is actually the last system with a glossy design. That's when Apple started transiting to the new design language, which has been introduced in iOS 7. iOS 6 introduced a bunch of new features regarding notification center, customizations, so you can actually now have invert color in your iPhone, so you can show like, hey, I've got a dark theme, but you just turn on invert color feature and that's all. I don't know exact features of iOS, but I can tell you exactly. iOS started having a lot of Mac features, so you could actually open up the Pages document and edit it there. So actually Apple made also multitasking. So in iOS 5 it also was, but there weren't really enough gestures. So, and the operating memory wasn't enough to make like power multitasking like in Mac. And now we come to iOS 7. iOS 7 actually gave a start to the huge redesign of Apple's software. So this is actually the latest system supported by this iPhone. So iOS 7 introduced a more select design and it's way more beautiful. So I personally like it because it's cool. After being glossy for entire 6 years, we need to have something new. And I'm pretty sure everyone has a question. Why don't we see any screenshots of Control Center in iOS 6? Why? Because iOS 6 and all earlier systems didn't have it. So Apple introduced that with iOS 7. So that is why there is no way in iOS 6 or earlier to turn on the flashlight without going to camera and taking a photo. Like, it's good. It's a good way to go. But iOS 10 Mavericks was still like all glossy. So Apple in next year introduced OS 10 Yosemite with the same design guidelines and so on. It was great. In 2014, Apple introduced also iOS 8. And that was actually one of the worst releases Apple ever made. Because it was buggy. It was really creepy to use. So actually, it's the first iOS I used as a daily driver on my iPad mini 4. Have you ever heard a bass boosted sound? Imagine the same thing on speakers on iPad. This sound was a little bit sharpened, but imagine you're just using your iPhone or iPad, typing in some kind of text, and then you hear this. So it's creepy. Apple actually fixed this issue for around 2 years, and then they came with a solution in iOS 10. So Control Center in iPadOS, an iPad version of iOS, was more capable. It had 2 sheets, and it was way more beautiful than just a simple rollout in iOS. So in iOS 9, Apple didn't really release a lot, but they actually did a lot of collapse features. So now you don't only collapse like the Keynote files, Pages files, Numbers files, or everything else. You can actually collapse photos. You can actually create shared iCloud libraries. You can collapse notes and many more. But this was actually not really a huge graphical release. Here's when Apple started to rethink the device from the very beginning in iOS 10. iOS 10 introduced a widget page with notifications. There were actually 2 columns until iOS 12, so it was fine. So they still had an old style control center, but it was fully new. So we had, except home screens, also one page dedicated to widgets. But that's just the beginning. It is continues with iOS 11. iOS 11 actually introduces the Files app. So that's when Apple introduced a new control center, which actually was not on the bottom, but in the top right corner for iPads. Yeah, it was still the same for iPhones, but yeah. iOS 12 was also buggy. It had a lot of graphical hiccups, especially on older devices like iPad mini 2. So I've got one iPad mini 2 in my house in Kiev, and it's completely, like gone. You can only turn it on, but the screen doesn't work because of that gestures. Yeah, it has a lot of freaking gesture and it's awesome, but just you need to hold a lot just to get something out of it, and due to low operating memory, it sucks. Yeah. So iOS 12 actually introduced a lot of more customization features. Yeah, more customization again. But the next iOS will blow your mind. iOS 13 introduces dark mode. So this is actually when Apple divides iOS and iPadOS, because Apple realized that iPad and iOS need different features. So that's when Apple introduces the Magic Keyboard for iPad. So it just takes to your iPad and you can use your iPad now as a notebook. It is fine, it is awesome. Also, in iOS 13, Apple introduces the Downloads tab in Safari. So if you download some kind of a picture and you want to save it to your files to later use it in Keynote, so you can now just click download. You have it in Downloads folder. You can open it up and save to files. That's awesome, right? But Apple started going forward. So remember those widgets pane? It's now just on site and it's really small. But people wanted more to have interaction with widgets. That's why we need to go to iOS 14, iPadOS 14. So that's when Apple started making home screen really customizable. So now people are able just to put in widgets wherever they want. And that was awesome. And in iOS 14 specifically, Apple added app library. So if you actually had some apps which you don't need on home screen but you need them, so you can just hide them in app library. And that was really awesome. But Apple didn't implement that, for what the heck, in iPadOS 14. So Apple made it in iPadOS 15. So actually it's really great, right? But you don't have any customization regarding home screen? Well, Apple will fix that in the 16th version of iOS, which was revealed on WWDC 2012 just a while ago. But now we got 15th version of iOS and 15th version of iPadOS. By the way, back in the day, I actually participated in the developer beta program, and I got a lot to say. So, by the way, if you want to check out some screenshots and one video from that time, feel free to go to my official Instagram account. So, iPadOS 15 actually introduced a lot of more continuity features. They improved Sidecar. So, they actually introduced that back in iPadOS 13, but it wasn't really well. So, heck, now I can use my iPad mini to have Sidecar with my 2014 MacBook Pro, and that's awesome. Yeah, I know iPad mini is not compatible, but I don't know how, but I got it to work somehow. And now we get to the newest iOS version, iOS 16. So iPadOS 16 has some new features, has a little bit redesigned, touch up I think, but not really much. A lot of changes were made inside iPhones. Now you can actually customize your home screens. Finally, Apple heard us. So now I can change our clock style, add items on our lock screen, and home screen as well. So we can change the accent color. So I think iPad Apple actually will implement that, but I sadly won't have any ability to see that because I got really old hardware. So that was it. Thank you very much for your attention. Don't forget to subscribe. That was Reimagine Incorporated. Keep in touch. See you next time.